All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started and we'll let people come in as they need. I just want to make sure we have enough time for Beth because she has a jam-packed presentation. So good morning, everyone. I'm Diana McAllister, and I'm the Quality and Professional Development Coordinator for ION. Some of you may be new with me, and some of you I know are not. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. Just a few housekeeping notes for everybody. We do record these webinars, and then they will be available to watch usually by Monday, by the time I get them all downloaded and on the web. And you can find them again on our website. So with that in mind, if you are uncomfortable or have a need to not have your face or voice recorded, now is the time to mute your camera and your mic. If you're having trouble with your audio, you're welcome to call in on your phone instead. That is just fine. And you're welcome to ask questions at any time, but you can also use the chat function if you'd like. I do monitor that throughout the call. We are using Zoom today. It has never, ever happened. We have never been hacked, but I think it's because I give this warning. We will do everything in our power to shut it down if something happens, and we'll reschedule if necessary, but fingers crossed it has never happened. So hopefully that is good. Whoops. And just a reminder for everyone, Power Up Summit registration is still open. Fingers crossed, we have a Power Up Summit. You are welcome to still register if you'd like. This theme this year is Build Up, and we're focusing on the quality building blocks. Our fall winter webinar series registration is now open. It is a 9-part series on race, equity, and inclusion. It's going to be amazing. It's once a month starting in September. It'll be presented by, in partnership with us, with Dr. Sheldon Eakins from the Leading Equity Center out of Pocatello, Idaho. He's absolutely wonderful. This is the first time we are charging for the series because we are partnering. It is $75 for all 9 webinars, or $10 each. If you want to check those out, either of those, please visit our website, idahooutoFschool.org. And now I am going to turn the time over to Beth Ficklin. Thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then you should have the capability to share yours.
All right. Just take me a minute. Hi, my name is Beth Ficklin. I work for Families Together here in the Moscow-Pullman area. I'm going to try and make this work. I'm not great with technology. I put a lot of slides in here because I talk fast when I get nervous. I wanted to make sure I had enough stuff. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the basics, just some basics about IEPs and 504s, which is special education, and just giving you some more information that you can use in your after-school programs if you're working with kiddos with special education needs. I always like to start talking about the 5 protective factors that help build resilience in children and families. And one is social emotional competence in children. And this is just helping kids learn to communicate their emotions and feelings. The better they are at communicating, the better they are at being a good partner in your program. Knowledge of parenting and child development is another one. So the more we're able to teach our parents how to help their kids, the better off they are. Social connections, and not just with our kids, but with their parents. The better their parents are at making social connections, the better the kids are at making social connections. One of the best predictors for positive outcomes in kids is if they have positive social connections within the school. Parental resilience is another one. Just how much resilience do the parents have, and how well can that family access concrete support when they need it? Another thing I always like to think about, this is not the end all, this is not the best information. Well, it's good information, but it's not the best information out there. So if you get something from this presentation that you think is awesome, then I would love for you to write that down and keep it and add it to your program. If you get information and say, hey, you know, this is something I'm doing that if I changed it a little bit, or if I made it a little different, my program will be better. We'd love to see you do that. And then if you want to add one thing, and actually, as I'm nervous, I just got that wrong. Keep is, we hope that you identify one thing in your program that you are doing a great job of, and we want you to keep doing that. So I'm going to start. There are a couple of models of disability out there. There's the moral model, where the thought is that the disability is a result of a punishment or a sin. They're always going to be a kid. They're a menace or a threat. And what we do as a society is we kind of isolate those kids or those people. They don't really have a lot of support. They're a charity case, right? There's also the medical model. Like, we put a lot of effort into fixing people who have disabilities instead of accepting them. We want them to be more like everybody else. We want them to hide it, And this is really hard on people. They spend their whole lives trying to be somebody that they're not. The more social model is we consider disability to be a diversity. We're all just different. Our brains all work differently, and that's okay. We want to change the way that we perceive people with disabilities. We want to look at their strengths, and it becomes part of their their identity. It's an empowerment. We want to accommodate them to help them live their best lives. And this is something that a person with disabilities, it comes from them. Like, how do you want me to help you instead of me deciding how you need to be helped? And then the fourth one is inspiration. I saw this on a TV show and I can't remember what it was, but the idea that, oh, a person with a disability is special or a gift for God or is exceeding expectations, it's kind of demeaning. It's kind of focused on non-disabled. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, you've overcome all of this stuff. How awesome are you? When really they're just living their lives and being people, and they want to have friends and be people like everybody else. And I have, a cool video if I can stop sharing this and then get over here. Sorry, I am not the best at, you would think I would be better at this, but I'm not.
We're patient people. It's okay.
I'm hoping.
Just make sure when you click that you optimize sound so that it will make sure
Okay.
it plays for us.
Let's see. It didn't give me an option. Can you guys, well, there's no volume here.
Okay.
Let me know. And I'm waiting. Sorry, it really has volume. Can you guys hear?
I think so. Wait, maybe not. Is it playing sound right now? Because now we can't hear anything.
Okay.
No.
Then I did something wrong.
Okay, so stop share.
Okay. Thank you.
We're gonna get through this, guys. And then when you click share screen, before you click on the screen you want to share, there's a button at the bottom that says optimize sound.
Awesome. And then I have to find it again. There we go.
Less able to play an active part in the world around you, and that this able to achieve your potential, less able to have meaningful relationships, less able to play an active part in the world around you, and that this is just your bad luck. This outdated view of the world puts the responsibility of overcoming disabling barriers on the person with an impairment. But this idea is changing. The more modern social model of disability says that a person doesn't have a disability, but that they are disabled. They are disabled by society. It is the attitudes and physical barriers imposed on them by society that prevents them from achieving their potential. The social model was developed by disabled people and their allies to help them take action against discrimination and to empower people to find solutions, remove barriers, and campaign together for equality and human rights. They showed how people with lots of different impairments face many of the same problems. These disabling barriers include prejudiced opinions and attitudes, restricted access, and people being systematically excluded. The social model looks for the ways that society can be planned and organised in order to provide accessibility, independence, and opportunity in a way that enables people rather than disables them. What we learn from the social model of disability is that disability is a social construct created by social barriers, barriers which can be eliminated. We learn that it is the responsibility of government, public spaces, businesses, and individual people to make the changes, to increase the access, and build a more equal society where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
Okay. And I probably should check that tab to make sure it's not doing anything else. So, what were you guys' thoughts on that? Or what are some thoughts that you have about that while I figure out how to share my screen again?
I can share. I have 2 children with disabilities, and so I think there's a constant fight between these. One is autistic and one is ADHD, combined type, and I get a lot of, "Oh, you would never know," and I'm like, "I don't even know how to answer that." Like, is that a compliment? Like, I usually say, "Until you do." Um, right? Because especially with autism, there's a lot of like labeling of everything. They're, high need, low need, or they're a level 1 or a level 2, or they're verbal, not verbal, or right. We get a lot of those things. And a lot of moral medical inspiration. I mean, like, it's just constant all the time. And we just want to be like, nope, he's autistic. He has needs. Everyone has needs. Sometimes his needs are more prevalent than other times and might be harder than other times for other people, but all people have needs. It's just a level of need.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that catches me is how much of those invisible disabilities like autism or ADHD are out there. I have ADHD, it's a disability, but I'm able to still live my life, and it's not the focus of my life. It doesn't stop me from doing anything. I haven't overcome anything. It's just my brain works different than everybody else's brain. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. Okay.
Also mention that I also have ADHD and my husband has ADHD. We are fully functioning humans in society.
As long as I have a Monster Energy right by me, I'm good today, right? That's always my thing. It's all good. So the sad thing in our country is that until 1973, there were no laws protecting people with disabilities. In 1973, the first law is this middle one right here, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And this prohibited discrimination of people with disabilities. In 1990, and I was in middle school when this happened, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil law that prohibits discrimination on disability. This is within my lifetime. This is before I graduated from high school. And then in 2004, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, is one of the new things. Now, the problem with these laws that a lot of people with disabilities will tell you is that it is the burden of the person with disabilities to prove that somebody's not following the law, which is kind of unfortunate, that we don't just do what's right. So what's the purpose of the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act? The purpose of that is to make sure that every child in the public education system has a free and appropriate public education. This is often called a FAPE. And this emphasizes special education, and it meets their very unique needs and helps them further their education, employment. And one thing a lot of us worry about is that independent living skills. Some kids may not go on to college, and that's okay. We want to make sure that by the time they finish high school, they're as independent as they possibly can. One change, and the thing about IDEA and Section 504 and ADA is that all of these laws, because they are forced to be, because people with disabilities are the ones who enforce these laws, there's a lot of court cases that then tell us how we're going to do it. So the most recent one is the Andrew decision. Before that, education just had to be de minimis, just the basic education. That's all you had to give a person with a disability. In 2017, they changed that and it became an appropriately ambitious. So you want to have kids be challenged too. And a lot of schools are kind of working to catch up at that. They're still doing the old law. They're not really changing. And that was just 2017. So real quick, the difference between a kiddo who's receiving education under Section 504, anybody with a disability can get this. If you're in a wheelchair, if you're unable to walk, if you have ADHD, which is another health impairment, you can get a document that tells teachers, hey, these are the things that we do to make sure that these kiddos have an education within your classroom. If a child is not able to access an education with just accommodations alone, and that's, more time on assignments, that kind of thing, then they would need something with a little bit more power, a little bit more teeth, and that's an individualized education plan. And this actually falls under the IDEA. This has educational goals. My kids have social emotional goals. We actually have organization goals where a teacher has to sit down with them and help them learn how to prioritize their assignments. These are very substantial documents. I think both of my kids have documents that are 30 to 40 pages. So this is like taking out a new loan on your house. Once a year, you sit down with a team, and that team helps you decide, hey, what is it that this kid needs this year? What's changed? What's improved? What's gone backwards? It's a very long process, and it's often very intimidating for parents. And that's the majority of my job, is I work with parents to help them navigate this system. So how do you guys as after school providers access it? And unfortunately, the short answer to that is FERPA doesn't allow you to have access to a child's academic record, and an IEP and a 504 are both protected under that. You can ask a parent for it if you know one's there and you want to be really proactive and say, hey, I understand you have a 504. We're helping your kid with homework. We would love to see what accommodations we can add, or how can we better accommodate your child. A parent can usually invite anyone they want to attend a team meeting. So if you have someone who's typically working with a child in your program, if the parent asks them, they can actually attend the meeting. So if you have a youth who's struggling in your program, I know a lot of parents of kids with special needs, one of the things we worry most about is childcare, and especially in after school programs. Talk to them, all right, take a deep breath and start over. I talked to a mom recently, and she was really struggling because her child had just been expelled from the YMCA just because, because the child was not able to follow the behavior regulations for that program. So what can you do before that happens? What are some things you can do? And just brainstorming, I came up with, communication is huge. You need to be talking to parents constantly. Like when you first notice a problem, don't let it go until it escalates. Make sure you're talking to them. Ask the parent if they've noticed these behaviors. If they have, then how did they deal with it at home, and how do they want you to deal with it in your program? If you have a child who is showing self-harm or other behaviors in a program, kids can get overwhelmed and do a lot of crazy things like bang your head on the wall and things that are just hard to understand, especially if they're overwhelmed. You want to make sure you know how to just de-escalate that. And parents are awesome at doing this. I've known so many parents that have kids in the school building that are just uncontrollable, but then at home they're fine. So parents know a lot. We've been dealing with it for a long time. If you form a partnership with the parents, you're going to have a lot better outcome with the kids. So what are some ways that we implement these laws in our education system? And first, I want to think, I saw we have some glasses in the group. So people with glasses, how many people have glasses? If you have glasses, do you think you could get through a day without it? My husband has a pretty severe degenerative eye condition. He can get through the day without his glasses. It's not a huge problem, but he would have to take the screen that I'm using and blow it up and read one word at a time. It would be very slow. He would have a hard time getting through the day. He could still do what he needed to do. He would still get his work done. It would just take him longer. So instead of working for 8 hours a day, he would work more like 10. So when we think about behavior problems, this is another thing that we add. We can add a behavior intervention plan to an IEP. And the goal of that is to help a child manage their behaviors in such a way that they're not interfering with their own education or interfering with the education of other people. I like its self-regulation, its organization can be added to an IEP, but you can also add a separate behavior support plan with a crisis plan to your IEP. So let's think about behavior. Behavior is often the result of challenges in communication, processing, or sensory issues. So my kiddo, like we've been talking about autistic kiddos, my kiddo, when she was really, really little, she would sit at the refrigerator and open the door and cry. And there are several times I remember going to the fridge and taking out everything in that fridge, one thing at a time, trying to figure out what it is that she needed. And we never figured it out. Once she began developing better communication skills, we had fewer incidents where we couldn't figure out what she needed. Behavior is the way someone acts in response to a particular situation or stimulus. If you had a rock in your shoe and you're walking around all day, by the end of the day, you're probably going to be pretty cross, right? So if you had to sit in a classroom where somebody was running nails on the chalkboard, and this is often with ADHD how I feel at the end of a day when everything is overwhelming, like somebody's been doing nails on a chalkboard. By the end of the day, I'm pretty cross, I'm pretty ornery. So we want to change the way that we think about behavior. It's not a negative thing. Behavior is communication. We don't want to treat a behavior, we want to figure out why the behavior is happening. What's the function? I went to a
Can I,
presentation.
sorry, can I ask, can I just add for all my program providers, you, just because that thing doesn't bother you, or just because you can't see it or hear it, doesn't make it less valid. And I know a lot of providers get really stuck in like, I don't know what caused the behavior. It came out of nowhere. and that may be true to you, but that's not true to the child. And so where Beth's going with this, I just wanted to remind you that a lot of times it may seem out of nowhere, but really they have the rock in their shoe, right? And you can't see it and you may not know that they have a rock in their shoe, but it's still there and it's still valid to them. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's a perfect comment. I think people with sensory processing disorder, they notice everything at once. And it's one of the things with ADD with me, and I'll talk more about ADD because it's just what I'm familiar with because I live with it. Right now in my room, the lights are bothering me. The fan over here was supposed to be helpful, but it's bothering me. I heard the washing machine go off because, of course, working from home, I'm in the basement near the washing machine. Everything's going off and it's all, and actually the lights above me are actually really bothering me. And that all leads to how you react in a situation. You would be surprised how much you can calm down a situation by just changing the lighting in the room. Fluorescent lighting is really hard on some of these sensory processing kids or kids with sensory processing disorder or ADHD. Just taking one of those screens and putting it over the light can calm kids down significantly. So I went to a de-escalation training up in Spokane a couple of years ago. And I was all excited. I'm like, hey, we're going to learn how to de-escalate behaviors. And you know what? I got there and they spent the whole time talking just about this. There is always a trigger for behavior. There is always that behavior and there's always that consequence for the behavior. And the way we use these words, like Diane was saying, it's not a good way to say it. A consequence is not a negative thing. Like, let's say, you know, a kiddo doesn't like to color with crayons, or definitely not color in the lines, and definitely not color with a blue crayon. But we have a teacher or somebody who's like, hey, you're going to do this. I'm going to force you to do it. Well, that kid just does not like it. It's bothering them to the point, and they reach up and punch the teacher, break the teacher's nose. And then there's a consequence. Well, obviously there's that negative consequence of, oh my gosh, you're going to get in trouble for doing that. But the consequence to the child was, at that moment, they had to stop. They got to stop doing what they didn't want to do. This was something that was really bothering them, that was really hard, to the point where they're going to physically react. And I think that's one of the things that can be behaviors sometimes seem to come out of nowhere. So I'm going to talk about behavior support. And like we were just saying, discipline and punishment. We have two very old dogs, and they were never fully potty trained. So my life is miserable. And we were talking this morning, if we are not looking at them and take them straight outside, then they will have an accident somewhere in the house. And the bad thing about it is, if I go discipline that dog when I find the accident, that dog has no idea why I'm disciplining it, right? So discipline teaches someone that they are going to behave because there are rules and expectations. Punishment inflicts suffering for a past behavior. So what we would rather do is prevent the behavior from happening. So yeah, if a kid is totally tears up a room, is so upset they can't be in your program for the rest of that day, what caused that? What was the antecedent to that behavior? What made it happen? We don't want to be reactive, because reactive, kids sometimes, like dogs, they forget. Like, then it's focused on they're more focused on the punishment and not really understanding why it's happening than focused on fixing something. This is just an overview of how behavior support plans are developed in school. It's part of the special education process. We have a referral. That would be your IEP team, the parent, teacher, or the problem-solving team within a school can refer a student for special education. They will be evaluated and determine if the IEP is needed. As part of the evaluation, if they have serious behavior issues, a functional behavior assessment may be warranted, and that's where you would have a skilled behavior support therapy person observe that child over different environments. So they would come to the home, they would come to the after school program, they would come to the school, and see how they behave in different places. And they would really try to understand what the undesired behaviors, what's causing them, make predictions, and try and fix that. So, but once the kiddo gets an IEP, next you would implement it through a year. You would collect data on that IEP, and then every 3 years we would evaluate. But then every year we have an annual renewal in this implementation process, where we're kind of looking at, okay, how well is what is working? How well is what we're doing working within the schools? What do we need to change? What do we need to tweak? This is just a quick reminder, parents should be equal participants in the process. We get all of the documents, and as part of that meeting, the notes that the school take, that's part of our rights, we get that. We also have the right to dispute resolution. So if something happens in the school that's not quite right, then we can go through mediation with the school district, file a citizen's complaint, and go through due process, which is very legal and often done with lawyers. So, what are some potential causes of behavior? We talked a little bit about sensory processing disorder. You can have sensory overload. So sometimes when kids have been listening to the nails on the chalkboard all day long, by the time they get home on the school bus, or by the time they get to you in an after school program, they just can't do anymore, and they'll kind of flip their lids. Bullying is a big one. Up to 94% of children with disabilities have been bullied at some point in their education career. Just feeling burned out. They don't feel safe. Something's going on, like maybe they're bullies in the after school program too. They're trying to do something that they struggled with. Somehow they didn't learn what they needed to do in school, and you guys are trying to do homework with them, and it's just not working. There are a couple of disorders that might not allow them to comply. The big one in my head is obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. So if you're trying to get a child to pick up something like a pen or something, and it just happens to be contaminated, you know, they just can't, their brain's not going to let them do that. And that's something you're not going to see or hear, or you're not going to realize that it's going on. And a lot of kids with disorders like this will mask. So they're not going to tell you why they don't want to pick up the pen, but they don't want to pick up that pen. They would rather jump in a pit of alligators. And then a new one that's kind of coming out is the oppositional defiant disorder. This is more, it's like teenagers on steroids. Like they really don't want to do what you're telling them to do. And so I'm going to show you a quick video on, I can't ever see what I'm doing. Sorry. I think I closed it. Shoot. Oh no, there it is. On sensory overloads. And this is one of my favorite YouTubers for autism. I love the way, I think her accent gets me, but I love the way she's able to really explain stuff. Sometimes her language is a little off, so I hope this is not one.
They are a neurological overload. Gets the body physically prepared to fight and flight by releasing lots of nasty stress hormones. Our brain activates cortisol, adrenaline, gets your heart pumping, the blood delivered to your muscles, so you can fight or run away, flee the situation. The difficulty is that autistic people will become overloaded from a lot of things because we are sensory sensitive, cognitively overloaded. The adrenaline, and your heart's racing so much and you're sweating so much, you can barely even think. I don't even know what I'm saying. I feel like I need to fight the situation to survive. Why does this happen? Triggers, baby, triggers. Iceberg theory. We all have a conscious, and underneath that, in the unconscious and the subconscious, are memories and other past traumas which we all keep bearing. We may be triggered because a routine has broken. We feel anxious outside of that, so we control a lot of the things in the environment to make it predictable. Some autistic people, when they melt down, will shut down, completely freeze, and go inwards on themselves. And I know that feels like you go completely numb. All the awful bad feelings come over me, and I actually become mute. I don't often speak for an hour or so when I'm in those states. Speaking about it makes me stim. Because it's a physical response, your autistic person cannot help this. It is not deliberate. It is our jobs as adults to react appropriately to autistic distress and trauma. See which one you think is more helpful. I'm having a meltdown and I'm hitting myself and I'm throwing things everywhere and I'm telling you that I hate you, and you're saying, yeah, well, I hate you too, and I don't think you're great either, and your behaviour is disgusting, and I'm never going to give you that present, and I'm cancelling your birthday party. The autistic person will fight and fight and fight because they feel it is the end of the world and they have nothing to lose. So try this. I know you are sad. I know you are angry. I am sorry you are in pain. How can I help? Is there anything I can do? Would you like me to go away? Would you like me to be quiet? Do you need a minute? Do you need a glass of water? Do you need a pen and a paper to show me? Can you show me through a movie or in a book? Can you draw how you feel? What are you afraid of? Validate your autistic. Validate how terrified they are in that moment. Even though it doesn't make sense to you, they may fight it. They may say to you, well, of course I'm not okay. Speak autistic. Speak in blunt, factual, logical terms. Say, I know you're not okay. I know you are sad. If you are finding that you are becoming overloaded from the meltdown, take a step back. That's not planned ignoring. That's you going away to get a drink, to look after yourself, regulate yourself, so you can be better equipped to help that person in distress. But you cannot do it if your fight-flight has been activated and you're fighting them as well. If you're in a situation with your meltdowns and you're asking, why is this not getting better? Ask yourself, are you fighting the meltdown as well? And if so, we have a few people in fight-flight here, and all of it needs to be deactivated. I hope that helped us.
Okay. So I love her. I love the way she explains things. I love, because I am not autistic, I love making sure that I bring other voices in. If you ever have kids with autism, that is a good, Agony Autie is one of the best spokesman, or they're the one that I like. There are a couple of others. YouTube has a lot of outreach for different disabilities. So there are people with ADHD explaining what it's like to have ADHD, that kind of thing. So I love this. I love her explanation of a sensory overload. I think it's pretty good because it really is something that once that kid gets into that position, all you can do is keep them safe until it's over. I mean, that's just it. So, wait, keep going. There we go. So, moving on, 20 to 30% of all school-age children experience bullying. It's either physical, verbal, indirect. It can be gossip. Gossip is bullying. Students with disabilities are even more likely to be bullied. There's a lot of variation in the statistics on that, but it goes up to probably 94%. Students with severe disabilities who are segregated are bullied more often than peers who are integrated inside the school. Students with mild to moderate learning disabilities are 2 to 3 times more likely to be bullied than their peers. So, and the reason I feel like bullying is so important, one of the things when we learn about ACEs, when we learn about adverse childhood experiences, the opposite of that is positive childhood experiences. And the thing that positive childhood experiences and what people think that it gives our kids is it gives them coping mechanisms to deal with these bullying situations or dealing with the adverse experiences that happen in the rest of their life. So if parents aren't able to be that soft place to land, then these kids really need more of a soft place to land when these bad things happen. So some challenging behaviors that happen, kids lying, a kid refusing your request. Gosh, I can't tell you how many times I've had to practically drag one of my kids out from under their bed because they don't want to go to school. And then finding out, well, something's going on at school, so they're being bullied, something bad is happening. Physical aggression, kids who are bullied or have experienced physical aggression, especially kids with disabilities, will then mimic that on other people. That emotional meltdown, the sensory meltdown, or temper tantrums, profanity, that's a fun one. We deal with that a lot in our house. Spitting, biting, I've dealt with that up through high school kids. So we want to remember when these things happen that the best way to not have to get into a de-escalate situation is to prevent it. If you're giving regular attention when the kid is not misbehaving, when you're communicating well with the kid, when you kind of have learned what their triggers are, you can generally prevent the behavior. And, and the more you're able to communicate, the more those behaviors aren't going to come out of nowhere. They're going to be something that you're able to predict. Responding. I like what Agniati said. We need to be calm to be able to de-escalate a kid and basically keeping them safe. My kids, when they're in sensory overload, I wouldn't touch them. Like I would keep everything away from them so they couldn't hurt themselves. But I personally would try not to put hands on them because it just escalates it so much more. You want to redirect as much as you can. And you have to just give them space to calm down. You need to calm down. And the third part of this is going to be to teach. You cannot teach a child in fight or flight. This is one of the big things in the ACEs study. You cannot teach a child who is escalated. You can't say, hey, well, you're upset because of this. Well, how do you think this other kid feels because you're doing this? They can't think, their mind shuts down. You just cannot teach them at that point. You have to wait. And so teaching is something that you're going to do all the time. So you're going to, part of that prevention or part of this prevention up at the top is going to be that you teach a child like, hey, when the lights are too bright, when you're starting to feel overwhelmed, you need to come tell an adult so that we can get you into a situation, get you into a calm down place, or get you somewhere where you're okay. We don't want you to get to be not okay. So that's going to prevent a lot of the de-escalation that you normally have to do. You want to know what the child's trigger. It is really okay to ask a parent. Parents sometimes know. We deal with these kids We deal with our kids all the time. I always find it funny when a teacher is like, oh my gosh, your child just totally flipped out today. I don't know what caused it. And I'm like, okay, well, let's look back at the IEP. And right here in the IEP is telling you, if you had not done this, my child probably wouldn't have flipped out on you. So a lot of parents understand what's going on. You want to do a lot of positive attention for kids with any disability. Transitions are a big thing, like moving from one activity to another. For those of us who have ADHD, we can hyper focus. So if I get into something that I'm doing and I'm really, really interested in it, it takes me an extra 4 or 5 minutes to move to another activity and start doing it. I can't just bounce from one to another. Once I've got my brain locked on something, which is really hard to do sometimes, it's really hard for me emotionally to come out of that. We notice this, parents, or you'll notice this if you've got any kids with autism, kids with ADHD love video games. If you're trying to transition them from a preferred video game activity to a non-preferred, it's going to be really hard. And you want to also try and alternate frequently between preferred and non-preferred. Okay, if you're doing homework, hey, if you'll just do this one problem, then you can go run around the building once or twice, or you can go play basketball, or you can go do something. It takes a little bit longer to get stuff done, but it also helps. It also helps a lot. And you want to know the kids you're working with. If you've got a kid who's got a particular behavior issue and they're always a problem, you want to try and have that same staff. Find a staff member who can relate to them and work with them, and make sure that they're always with them as much as possible. So we're going to respond. This is going to be redirecting. This is giving positive attention for positive behaviors. Don't focus on the negative behavior. I can ignore a lot. Most of my kids are like, Mom, you've tuned us out so long, you tune us out all the time. And it's true. If they're asking me the same thing over and over and over again, and that's not how I want them to ask it, I tend to tune it out. They have to actually come and make eye contact with me, which is my ADD, and ask for what they want. And this is basically for non-threatening behaviors. Once a child is in danger of hurting themselves or other, they're throwing desks around, they're hitting themselves, they're destroying property, you need to go back to what was that predetermined plan that you worked with the family. If you've made one, if you can make one, knowing what your plan of action is in a crisis situation with a kid is going to be key. You want to have a plan going in. You don't want to go in like, oh my gosh, what do I want to do? Because if you have the plan going in, your fight or flight is not as likely to be triggered. So teaching kids, again, like we said, we're not doing this during a crisis. We are going to model good behavior. So it's okay for kids to see you when you get upset and see how you calm yourself down. They want to be like you, and they want to do what you're doing. So self-injury, and these are some examples of things that could happen. Self-injury is a big one. You know, kiddos who just happen to be knocking their head on the wall or hitting themselves, or, kind of thing. You do want to deal with that. You want to give them an alternative behavior. Often when kids are just overwhelmed with the environment, some of them will rock, some of them will sometimes that stimulation will help knock their brain, and that's why they do it. It helps knock their brain back to a normal state. But finding other ways to do it, like instead of, hey, you're stimming by knocking yourself, maybe stimming by a visual stim, like if you have glitter in a jar or something for them to look at. You want to use the crisis plan. You want to work with your staff to get a crisis plan together if you have kids that are prone to this. Sensory meltdowns, I think we've covered this pretty good. You just want to make sure you talk to your parents and know what the trigger is, kind of watch the kids. Like, you're not going to prevent every sensory meltdown. You just want to be, after it happens, you want to evaluate what happened and then see if you can prevent it in the future or get better. So when a child is in danger of hurting themselves or others, the big thing is be calm, be non-confrontational, make eye contact or not, because some kids that'll escalate them further. Talk softer, talk slower, identify with the kids, give them space, Try not to yell or grab or nag or be fearful. You just want to be as calm as you possibly can. You want to help redirect them. You want to give them downtime, go for a walk, that kind of thing. So here's just another way to think about that. We're just saying the same thing over and over again. Ignore the behavior, try to redirect, suggest a preferred activity. Use a signal, snap fingers, get on eye level, help them get excited about something, be super silly, give them some space. Square breathing. There's a good video on that, but I think I'm probably getting close on time, so I'm going to skip that this time. The crisis management plan is what you want to follow when the child or someone else is in danger, and you want to have that planned out in advance. You know, a lot of parents of kids with disabilities may not tell you what you're getting into with their kid just because they don't want to get kicked out of the program. So if you start seeing kids, and you guys have worked with kids long enough, that are starting to show those signs that they're going to escalate quickly, before you start having problems, see if you can get the parent to help you develop a plan to work with them. I mean, most parents are going to be super grateful that they have childcare, because it can be really difficult to keep that.
Can I add one?
Yeah, sure.
For some of these guys, I think a behavior plan and crisis plans are different than discipline plans. And if you only have a discipline plan in place, you've skipped a couple of steps.
Yeah.
So please, right? You're like, I know a lot of centers and a lot of programs have parent handbooks that have discipline plans in them, and a lot of times they forget to have what behavior plan is in place prior to ever hopefully getting to a discipline plan. As Beth has said earlier, discipline is not where you need to focus, right? Like, roll back.
Yeah, discipline, dealing with the behavior after it's already happened, you're just stirring the pot. You want to deal with it before. You want to try and prevent the behavior. I love that. That's great. So going on, I don't know how many of you guys deal with this, dealing with profanity. In my house, I have preteens and teens, so we deal with it a lot. The best advice I can give you is not to react. Like, my kids, wait, what is that saying? Okay, is not to react. Try not to react to the word. Whatever they say, just be calm. Like, I practice it. My kids can do pretty much anything to me, and I am pretty calm. I don't react. And so they just stop doing it. Like, sometimes they're using that profanity as a shock value. And if you don't react and you keep going, you don't have to use the word. You can teach later. You can model correct vocabulary and tell them, hey, that's not a good word to use. But if they're just doing it for shock value, you don't want to react. An emotional crisis is anything that requires a parent's or guardian's immediate attention. And this is when you can't soothe the child. So you want to remain calm. You may need to tap out. Kids who, oh gosh, I've had my own kids, they can have these severe emotional crises that last for hours and hours and hours. And there's really not much you can do about it. You've just got to be there with the child, let them know that you care, be as calm as possible. And especially if there's not really any immediate danger to the child, you want to call the parent or guardian and say, hey, is there something else we can do? Is this something you want to come get them for? Because part of it is these kids are going to want to know that their parents are going to come for them, and they're going to feel safe if they know that if something really bad happens, their parents will come. So another one is stealing. Like, a kid takes something that's not there. Have them return the item of their own free will. Make sure that they don't have the opportunity to take things that don't belong to them. Respond. In this, you only want to say what you know for sure. You don't want to just jump to the conclusion that a child has stolen something, because, well, I mean, that's not appropriate. You should know for sure. You want them to tell you that it happened. And you want to teach them trust and empathy and talk to them about returning it safely, whatever they've taken. And so this is all of the information. This is where I borrowed all of the slides that I got from you today. And then this is my contact information. So I'm going to turn it back. I think I stuck to time pretty good for you guys. And did we have, I know there were some things in the chat. I don't know if there are any questions.
I was throwing things in the chat, but I would love to open it for questions. And I'm going to screen share for a minute while we wait to see if anyone has questions, because
Okay.
I wanted to show some things.
Oh, I love the way your screen is organized. That's awesome.
Yeah, talk about an ADD trait.
Right?
I cannot have everything open on my desktop. But I wanted to show you guys real quick on our ION website, the idahooutoFschool.org. I have a couple of places if you're looking for things to support anything that Beth has been talking about. I have two places, one under quality, under resources. Building block 1, which is intentional program design, has a couple of areas that you may want to check out. Whoops. We do have an IEP release form if you're working with a parent in a school and you need information. We do have that there for you guys, and a whole bunch of how to create learning plans prior to behavior plans. But if you're looking for behavior specifically under events, Behavior Management Institute, I did drop that we will be opening our, I'm going to turn my camera off. I know I'm being glitchy. Well, maybe it's corrected itself. Applications for Behavior Management Institute will open in November. And that is a huge full day. You will create a behavior plan with your team while you are there, right? But if you're looking for things right now, we have more information on ACEs, which Beth talked about. We have some videos, infographics. We also have some examples and templates. So if you're looking for a full program behavior matrix, continuum of consequences, the functions of behavior that Beth talked about earlier, the difference between positive reinforcement and bribery. So I know that gets, people get hung up on that. The emotions wheel, anyway, logical consequences, behavior interventions. We keep all of that in here for you guys. You're welcome to check them out and call me at any time. And I also have under ION web workshops. First of all, this training will go in this exact same spot. There we are. But last year we did one adolescent brain science, which was a great training for behavior. But I also did a behavior tips and tricks, which kind of will build on this training. All right, so that all being said, does anyone have questions with Beth? I know working with parents to understand IEP needs came up a lot prior to this training. So I don't know if you have any tips quickly on how to get this information from parents, because I know parents can fall into, I am the sharer where I come into a program and I'm like, my child's autistic, these are their needs, here's how to help them prior to problems happening. But there's also parents that'll come in and be like, my child's fine, there is no, like, they're shamed or don't want to talk about it and think it should be on the program or the teachers to figure it out. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of that is cultural. You know, it's, I run into a lot of different people, and we have a cultural that medical, the medical model of disability is pretty strong out there, that it's something that should be fixed, and that it's something that, hey, this is something's wrong with my kid. And we don't want to have stuff be wrong with our kids. We want our kids to be perfect, and we don't want to have to tell people, hey, something's going on that you need to fix. I would say just kind of meeting parents where they are is a big thing. Like, there doesn't have to be something wrong with your kid, you know, like, well, you know, I noticed they're struggling with this. I noticed they're struggling with finishing their homework on time. They seem to be distracted easy. Is there something that you do at home that makes this easier? You know, trying to get that information out of parents. And I really think a lot of times parents do struggle with that fear that they're going to lose care if they have a kid with a disability. And I mean, you know, honestly, we know that it's illegal to discriminate, but at the same time, we also know that when kids have very challenging behaviors, it's really hard for a lot of our programs to support that. And you guys aren't schools. You know, schools can't kick a kid out. Well, they figure out ways to do it, but for the most part, you know, that's one thing. You have behavior plans, you have standards of behavior, and if kids aren't matching that, then, you know, if a kid can't match that, the mom kind of knows, and maybe she's just putting a kid in your program to see if they can get 3 weeks worth out so they can go to work or they can have some respite. So a long answer to a short question. It's mostly communication with parents and just making them feel comfortable with you as a person. It's okay for your kid to have a disability. That's just who they are. They're just different.
And I would add that, as Beth said earlier, and I've tried to hopefully say as well, having a plan really helps, even if you have a team plan for the whole program, and then it's much easier to build individual plans off of. If you're working blind, everything feels like a crisis and all behavior seems unsurmountable. And it's so much harder to stay calm, like she was saying earlier. So please reach out if you are having discipline, I don't want to say discipline problems. That came to mind for my own child because that's what I hear a lot. Having behavior issues in your program. Please reach out to us and we will help you with those. We want to help you be successful and have all the kids in your program be successful. And it's so hard. So you guys deal with a lot of variety of age ranges and often coming from multiple schools or into multiple places. And you guys have a lot of different spaces and area for kids to operate. So it might be homework help, it might be sports, it might be, you know, this kid has a hard time with music, or, you know, 100 kids in the program at once. And that's what we're here to help support you with. Does anyone have any other questions for Beth while she's on with us? Oh, I also dropped a link in chat. If you guys will just take the 2 minutes after when we close out here to just fill out my survey, like 5 questions long. It's real fast. It just helps us make sure that we're on track with our training and helps with our funding. So if you guys can click that, fill that out for me, that would be really great. But anything else with anyone? No one has a behavior problem or that kid that they thought of when we went through this talk or that parent?
You know, we are here to support families. So we're here to support parents. If you have parents that are just looking for more support, they're frustrated, you can always send them our way. I mean, the great thing about COVID is we've all learned how to be remote and still do our jobs. So we can help parents. If you're struggling, we can definitely do that, even if they're not Moscow area.
And I will tell you guys, if you do not have a child who has done, if you are not one who does the IEP 504 process on a regular basis, it can be really frustrating. So supporting parents just through that process is great. I like to think of myself as well informed, and it's frustrating even for me. So, right, because you're talking about your child's worst day and your worst attributes, and it's never the most fun conversation to have. So, and also support your parents. Your parents are growing up, right? You have parents that I guarantee you have parents that are autistic, ADHD, ADD themselves, or with other disabilities. So just be kind and remember that. Or you guys are struggling with those same things. So be kind to yourself as well and your staff. No questions? You are welcome to email me your questions if you don't want to verbalize them right now, that's fine. But otherwise, if you guys have nothing, we will say goodbye and you're welcome to hop off. Or if you're waiting to ask a question privately, I'll hang out for a few more minutes. But thank you so much, Beth. I appreciate your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It was fun.
There was a lot of interest. So I think, again, I think people will watch the recorded video later.
You're welcome, April. Yeah. Well, I hope it came out okay.
Yes.
Always.
It was.
Yeah. I have more of a struggle with the online stuff than anything else. So yeah.
Well, it's always more fun to do it in person for sure.
Isn't it right? Yeah, but for real, if anybody needs anything, for sure, reach out to us. We can help. I agree. Having another person in the room or helping with IEPs
Thank you, Emily.
is huge. Thanks, Emily. Oh, what a great name. But yeah, and that's 99% of what I do is helping families communicate with the schools. And honestly, if something happened to me, my husband couldn't do what I do. He's got a PhD, he couldn't do it.
My husband comes to all IEP meetings. We've been very, very fortunate.
Oh, nice.
I'm very, very fortunate that I have a husband that comes with me to every IEP meeting. I struggle, and maybe this, now that everyone's off, I have a special ed coordinator that does not like, I don't know if she doesn't like her job. She doesn't like kids with special needs. I don't know. It is like pulling teeth to get accommodations from her. And she flat out lied about testing for dysgraphia that I just blew my mind. And now I'm just like trying to gather my calm. It's like,
before you deal with this?
Before we deal with it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's all the
right. And I'm just like,
that's awful.
And I know she's,
like my big thing is
have my
documenting.
background.
Like
so
I do everything by email.
That's what we've started doing. So I have it in writing that she said we don't test for dysgraphia. And I was like, wow, really? That's crazy. And then later we went to online school for a year last year, and he had a different IEP person, and she was like, of course what? Like, of course we can test for reading and writing, and like, we can't diagnose, but we would absolutely be able to say, yes, they fall into these categories. And so now I'm like,
Thank you. Well, you can always ask for an independent evaluation. So you can ask if they can't test for it, and you can say, well, they need to be tested. Send us to somebody who can, and that's
right.
That's a big thing. I'm trying to think. I know in Washington, and that's kind of where I struggle, because I'm doing IEPs in Washington State. Washington State has a liaison that I can call and say, hey, this is the problem I'm having with my school district. What do you want? What should I do? What's my next step? And so there should probably be somebody.
We're transferring back to that school with that IEP person. The good news is with the person last year, I changed his entire IEP, got all the accommodations I wanted. So now I'm like, well, now you can't change it without my permission, or without talking to me. So now we're just looking at getting that testing done for his reading and writing. But I'm like, I will force you to do it, because you are doing this to other parents who don't have the knowledge I have. I know you are. So
I know they are. So I do everything in writing, and then there's a good thing, the NICHY. And I'm probably getting the wrong letters. I have to Google it every time. They have forms for letter writing.
Oh, okay.
So it gives you a little bit better terminology, so that, because that's one thing is, I think as a parent, sometimes I have a hard time wording what I want or communicating effectively what I want. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. So I'm like,
and especially with the ADD, it makes it even worse. And I'm trying to see.
My husband has to sit between us now, because she's a touch, like a like the person who's like, oh, it's okay, and like she'll touch you, and I'm like, normally I'm a touchy person, but I'm like, you do not have permission to be in my bubble. Please stop.
Especially I love COVID.
Yeah, right.
Because it gave us all a bigger bubble, and I love having it.
Yes, right. Well, my children who like bear hugs and compression are having a hard time with it, but some of us other people are like, please do not touch me. It'd be great.
Exactly. I'm trying to find it, but I'll have to.
If you find it, you can.
I have it in an email. I'll email it to you, and get that to you. But that's a good way, because it tells me this is the wording that school districts understand. And that's the big thing. Schools use different language than we use in normal. And it's bad.
It is. And I know that's what she's doing, is the literal, I asked about diagnosing for dysgraphia, and she was like, no, we don't do that. Whereas any other like normal, they would have been like, oh, we can't diagnose, but here is what we can do. Right. And that would have been the response that probably should have happened. But instead, she was just like, oh, nope, totally disregarding. And I've brought it up twice now, disregarding his need for that. And so then it becomes, we've struggled all for like 2 years on reading and writing, when he probably should have been receiving supports for that this entire time.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's so hard. So I will send you the letter writing guide. That's fine. Okay. If you ever need me, if you're doing virtual IEPs, if you ever need me to sit with you and take notes, I'm intimidating. I'm not.
That's why I'm like, I'm intimidating when I want to be. That is not a problem. It's just, yeah.
I'm intimidating. I'm not, I think sometimes just having another person in there in our area, it's a lot of the time they're only scheduling, and I have been fighting my school district so hard. They're scheduling IEPs immediately before school and immediately after school. So from 7:30 to 8:15 and from 3:30 to 4. And I'm like, one, that is not enough time for an IEP. And two, what parents you have to get off work, you have to quit a shift, you have to get there, you have to find childcare because you're not home, all of this stuff that has to happen to go to that 30-minute IEP. And they're like, yeah, we have tons of parents who aren't coming to IEP meetings. And I'm like, happened to a friend of mine that always goes to our IEP meeting. They're like, yeah, we were coming up on a date and we just had it without you because, you couldn't meet our dates. And I'm like, so many laws you just broke.
Right? Like, you can't.
You really shouldn't be doing this. And then we really worry about it, culturally, especially with some of our Hispanic families. They don't want to talk about disability, like, hey, my kid doesn't have a disability. So their kids are needing support, but they're not going to the IEP meeting. So, unless you've got a really good special ed teacher. And in the district, we have a couple, but not all of them are really good. You're just screwed. I mean, and it's not fair.
It's not. Well, that's why I'm like, we have one that's not good. And I know that if parents don't know what to ask or what to do, they wouldn't know that she's not allowed to have a meeting without them. They don't know they have to sign off on their IEP. Like, how would you know that if you didn't work in that system? Like, how would you know, like, as a parent, as a program provider, as any, like, how do you know those things? You have to go find it. It's so frustrating. And
yeah,
I wish there was an intro to IEP for parents when your child first gets an IEP, instead of getting handed like all this paperwork and like, here's all your rights, do you want it, and you have to do it. So annoying.
So we do that in our support group. We start out with hey, this is what an IEP 504 is. And I always do the thing, and then the parents that come are the ones who have already been through the process and know that they screwed up. And I'm like, man, I put this all together. But we've started getting a bigger group. That was one of the problems that happened in our community. I was like, I'm not getting, this is really, our school district is really taking advantage. This is really bad. What do we do? So I started a support group. I was like, hey, I'll start a support group. I don't even know what a support group is, but we're all going to get together once a month and hash out our problems, and we're going to come up with a plan. And so we started making some progress in the district to get it a little bit more parent friendly. But still, we had asked for an advisory committee for special needs forever. Still can't get it. Like, I'm talking 5 years now, and they're like, it costs too much. I'm like, it costs too much to have parents help you develop your system. Yeah.
I think we're just stuck. I'm in West Ada. We're just such a huge, there's 40,000 kids, and I can't imagine how many of those have support plans. And I think they just do the minimum because they don't have the bandwidth to do more, and it's so hard. It's like, nah.
Yeah. Well, and funding for education in Idaho is not great.
Yeah.
I mean, it just isn't. So yeah, they probably don't. It's not a priority.
No.
But I mean, still, you're bringing in the special needs kids. If you've got 40,000 kids, you have what, 4,000? Easy, that's
Easy.
10%.
Right.
Easy, 4,000 to 5,000 kids with special needs.
Right.
That's, easy several $1 million.
Right.
Like our school district with 300 is 3 million. So 4,000, multiple $1 million. Yeah, what are you using it for?
What are you doing? And I was like, what's happening? Why am I the one that has to fight every 5 minutes for services?
And I have kids who are not high needs, who are higher functioning, I guess, because there's so many labels.
And that's what I'm like, when are high functioning? I always say until they're not.
Until they're not. But I mean, mine can generally sit in a classroom and learn. They just need support to actually learn, know? So this isn't like I'm sending you kids with behavior problems. So what are you using that $3,000 for?
My youngest starts kindergarten this year, and I'm like, I'm going to get a call from kindergarten immediately for behavior. I know it. He got sent home twice this year from a program that only had a discipline plan and no behavior plan, and no amount of me giving them examples, telling them I'm good at writing, I will help you write a behavior plan. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to work with a kid with special needs. So
I hate that. I'm sorry.
Fine. My other son goes to an amazing summer program that my littlest will transfer to next year. So I'm okay with summer programming, but I'm like, I already know. I'm like, yep, he's that combined ADHD type where he's inattentive and hyperactive. Impulse control is low. It's really, really hard.
That is really hard.
Yeah.
Summer programs used to lose one of mine. She was an eloper, and so we take her to the summer program, and I'm that parent who was bad about warning them that, hey, she'll run off. Although I think I did warn him, like, hey, she'll run off. You have to keep an eye on her. We find her halfway to Clemson. I'm like, great. This is wonderful. Please don't lose my kids.
That is a worry for my little one.
Yeah.
Not a worry for my older one. He's too lazy to do that. He's not going to run. He's not going to get, because like I'd have to actually walk somewhere. Why would I do that?
I love teenagers. I love teenagers during COVID. Like they're ornery and they're always home with you, but they do their own thing. Like all of my kids are in all of their rooms doing their own thing. That's and nice. They won't bother me till lunch. And then I've got to remember to bother them.
Mine are still 9 and 5. So they were like all the time. I'm surprised. Actually, they did knock once while we were doing training tasks for snacks. So